How you doing, Mr. Leonard? It's Chris and Rob Howard. Welcome to our discussion. Rob, so here's the deal,
Howdy.
guys. This is the land development class at Virginia Tech. Some of you probably recognize this face because I've been there. Some of you probably recognize that face because he's probably answered some of your questions. Mr. Leonard asked us to talk about a few things for you today, so we're going to record this and send it over to you, and hopefully you don't fall asleep listening to us. We'll try to keep it fun. But I already asked the lecturer at App State how long I had, and he said probably 20 minutes before they lose interest. So here we go. Rob, why don't you introduce yourself and talk to us about your project at Duke Street Cottages?
Yep, Rob Howard. I'm the president of Howard Building Science based in Granite Falls, North Carolina, which is also the location for our first pocket neighborhood cottage court infill development. It's called Duke Street Cottages. It's 11 small homes on 1.25 acres surrounding a shared courtyard in the center. So it's a traditional Ross Chapin style pocket neighborhood. If you're familiar with his work, literally wrote the book on pocket neighborhoods. So you've got the houses front on this shared courtyard in the center, and the parking is on the outside. So there's a one-way alley in the back, basically, where you park. And these are 800 to 1,400 square foot. So fairly small, 2 to 3 bedroom homes. And I'm selling them in the $250,000 to $300,000 range.
Awesome. You just mentioned the size and the number of cottages. I'm going to pull that up here in just a minute and share my screen. Let's talk about methodology real quick. It's kind of been a little bit of a construction lab, right?
Yeah, every house I've built is a lab experience, so I like, I think of myself as a, practitioner in residence. So or I think at Tech, they call it professor of practice. So yeah, I'm a practicing general contractor, builder developer who also teaches building science. But yeah, I think certainly my building time in the field helps inform, the work that I do in the classroom and vice versa.
So I've got this pulled up and they can see, the houses were to be built DOE zero energy ready. And can you speak a little bit about the methodology so that they can get a better sense of your progression from the first house to the one that you just set? Because they're a little different.
Yeah, for sure. So the first 9 homes were built with structural insulated panels, SIPs, specifically Eco Panels, which is a company based in Mocksville, North Carolina. We used their wall and roof panels to create the building envelope, and those are extremely airtight and well insulated. As you said, all built to the DOE Zero Energy Ready Home standard, or whatever the heck they're calling it now. I still call it Zero Energy Ready Home because I like the sound of it. Yeah, in addition to a really solid building envelope, these are all electric homes using high efficiency heat pump technology wherever it's available. So mini splits, heat pump water heaters, heat pump dryers, induction ranges. We're trying to put the money where it matters. So I like to spend the money on the technologies that actually have an impact on the performance of the home, and thus have a direct impact on the operational expenses to live in that home. Much like the homes I built when I was at Habitat for Humanity for 15 years, we're trying to make sure they can afford to buy it, but also afford to own and operate it.
Yep. Awesome. So the last house that you just set back in the fall was not hybrid or panelized, right? It was full volumetric.
Yep. My first CD volumetric build. And yeah, I mean, I don't know if you want to get into the whole story about, why we had to modify our site plan, but, well, we need to serve beer with that story. But, you know, at the end of the day, we had to pivot and come up with a more narrow house plan to fit on this lot. So we went from 24-foot wide to 16-foot wide. And that gave me an opportunity to try modular because they can actually build a 16-foot wide module and ship it down the road. So this home was actually built by Cardinal Homes in Williamsburg, Virginia, and they shipped it about 200 miles to Granite Falls. And we set those 2 boxes. Chris was actually there on site that day. So, it took about 3 to 4 hours to set a 2-box house. And yeah, it took much longer to build that crawl space foundation than it did to set those two modules. But we went from, a foundation to I don't know, 85% complete home in less than a day. So that was a powerful learning experience for me. It's not perfect by any means. This is the first time I've done it, so we're still learning. Um, we always have room for improvement, but yeah, so far I'm really pleased with the quality of construction and the way it turned out.
Yeah. So I'm just showing here, the front elevation, side elevations, just to give people an idea, board and batten exterior that came to life. You were going to do a fortified roof. Did you ever end up doing a fortified roof?
That was the intent, but the factory did not follow through on that, unfortunately. So that didn't happen. But yeah, I mean, I've become well versed on the fortified home standard and requirements for construction. So happy to talk through any of that, if you want. But let's just say you have to be very clear about your construction specifications, and all the design and engineering has to be done clearly up front so that it makes its way into the production drawings with the factory. But once they say go in the factory, those two modules are moving down the line pretty quickly. So if it's not in the production drawings, if it's not on their checklist in the factory, it's not going to happen. And unfortunately, the fortified spec did not make it into the checklist. So
Yeah.
we'll do better next time.
Well, so what's really interesting and what, Professor Leonard's probably hinting at right now in his mind is DFMA and how important it is to be embedded in the factory at the time of specification, because he's got great stories around that. The one that he shares frequently is going to the factory and talking to the plant manager and saying, "Hey, I need you to stop production." The plant manager saying, "Do you have any idea how expensive it's going to be for me to stop production?" To which he responded, "Do you have any idea how expensive it's going to be for you not to?" And having a guy like that on the factory floor that understands the specifications and having a factory that can respond to DFMS is really, really important. So I think that probably on the volumetric side is the one shining lesson learned that we should talk about, is that they're only going to build what you convey, and it's only going to build what's in the plans. And there's always a gap, and that gap is where the inefficiencies are, and that inefficiency gap is where the cost comes in the form of something, labor down the line, or another specification, or a halt, or something. So the reason why that's so important in what you do, Rob, and what I'm doing is that you're building attainable, sustainable homes, right? So you have to hit a certain mark. You can't just be inefficient and come in and let the market dictate your cost overruns, right? So that's why it seems to me like one of your methods, this method of volumetric construction, is so interesting, because it reduces your risk and gives you some predictability, right? If it's your mistake, it's your mistake.
For sure. Yep. Whether you're building it, traditional site built, uh, analyzed, prefab, or full volumetric modular, you're going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen, so you've got to be, flexible enough to pivot, and make the best of it in that situation. But yeah, one of the things I really like about the modular process is all the time and energy that's spent on the front end in design, making sure that everything is exactly the way it's supposed to be before you ever start construction. Because again, once you start, it's going to go really quickly. So yeah, you don't want to slow up their entire production line. You also don't want them to pull your boxes off the line, you know, because there's other boxes, coming in behind them, because you don't know when yours are going to get back in. But yeah, I mean, one example is we did have to get our HERS rater, home energy rater, out of Raleigh into the factory to do the insulation and air handling inspections. And, so that has to be coordinated, and it did slow them down, probably a day and a half to pull that off. But thankfully, this factory was flexible enough to allow that to happen.
All right. Well, thank you for that. We said we would spend about 10 minutes on each topic, and Professor Leonard has asked us to talk about Duke Street cottages, pathway communities, and then Hudson Commons. So maybe I'll transition the conversation into pathway communities, and lead with what pathway communities is. It's my brainchild, I guess, so to speak. We're not really sure what our entity is. We're not a not for profit, and we're also not a public benefit company yet, but we are a model. We know that. And Rob is on the board of trustees, as is Professor Leonard. So what we like to consider our purpose is to create stable living. So the affordable housing model, as we see it from the funding perspective, even the land acquisition, and then the voucher system is pretty encumbered these days. There's lots of cuts at the federal and state level for funding, and that doesn't address any of the need. Our need for affordable housing continues to grow, and our inventory continues to shrink. This product, this method or model, so to speak, for pathway communities is about stable living. So it picks up on a lot of the hints of what Duke Street Cottages did with attainable, sustainable housing, and then it kind of wraps some services into it. One, it's an ownership model, not a rental model. And we are incorporating the wraparound services of digital equity and financial acuity to the table. So we're building specifically for civil servants in communities so that they can live and serve in the same place. So we're going to qualify the ownership profile a little bit. Think nurses and teachers, first responders, paramedic, police, fire. And then we are going to give them access to ownership sort of as Habitat for Humanities does. So you can see you have to remove the stigma of affordable housing. It's really not that at all. We're calling it stable living by trying to give them the benefit and access to equity. You've got a ton of experience with Habitat for Humanities and that community land trust model and that ownership model. Let's talk about that just a little bit.
Yeah, I mean, I'm assuming everybody's familiar with Habitat for Humanity, at least as an organization. But I don't know if everybody understands how that works. But they call it sweat equity. Because the home buyers have to put in so many hours of sweat equity into, first of all, helping build other people's homes to actually get on the wait list for a home. And then once their house, starts construction, they're going to work on that as much as their schedule allows before they can close on the purchase of that home. But most of the time, the habitat model, they're subdividing into individual lots, and the home buyer is buying both the house and the land. With the case of the land trust model, I'm also on the board for the Watauga Community Housing Trust in Boone. This is another way of trying to reduce the cost of buying an affordable home because you're taking the cost of the land out of that transaction. So they're buying the house, but they're only renting or leasing the land that house sits on. So it's basically a 99-year ground lease is what they call it. And, so you're paying whatever, $1 a year, to lease that ground, that dirt that the house sits on. But what's different about that model is if the house sells eventually, it's called a shared equity model. So the homeowner would realize a portion of the equity in that sale, but some of that would go back into the land trust.
Yeah, and you and I are part of the Housing Innovation Challenge too. That's happening. Different conversation and not a topic for now, but what we realized pretty quickly is that these systems are highly integrated. The financial system that supports market rate development or affordable, attainable, sustainable housing, the housing system itself, and how the envelope or how the enclosure performs, plus the financial system of ownership and equity on the other side, on the community owner side, they're inextricably connected. And up until recently, everybody just sort of worked in their swim lane and got out when they needed to. So you'd find a finance capital, you'd have a developer, you'd break ground, you would cut a ribbon, be done with it, let the market dictate what it costs to acquire that house. And then from there on out, folks would just sell the house for whatever market value was. So even if you started with an affordable, attainable, sustainable product, you didn't have that in perpetuity, right? So what I understand the community land trust to do is also in a form of deed restriction where they end up buying the house back. Is that right? If someone wants to move out, how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, in other words, it's like first right of refusal, and most likely you would end up, purchasing that back and then selling it again to, another qualifying family.
Yeah. And that's part of what we're doing with Hudson Commons. So I guess we can talk about that a little bit. Set the backstory on the town of Hudson and the land itself, and then maybe introduce how you got me involved.
Yeah, so I originally bought this property, I don't know, 3, 4 years ago, I guess, in Hudson, North Carolina, another small mill town, just up the road from Granite Falls, between Hickory and Lenore on Highway 321. It's one of those situations where I wasn't really looking for, property at the time. I was actively engaged in this project in Granite Falls, but the town manager from Hudson came to my groundbreaking ceremony at Duke Street Cottages, and he said, "Hey, when are you going to build one of these in Hudson?" And I said, "As soon as you help me find the land." So I was sort of kidding, but he took it very serious. And it wasn't, just a few days later, he called me with an opportunity. This piece of property he knew was going to be hitting the market soon. And so he made an introduction with the heirs of the family that owned it. And I was able to negotiate with him to purchase it. And as you know, having an existing house on the property made it easier to finance. It's always easier to finance an asset, like a home versus just raw dirt. So I was able to purchase the house and land. And this one's twice as much property as I have in Granite Falls. It's right at 2.5 acres. So I essentially leveraged the existing house as a rental property for a couple of years, to make the payments on the loan that I took out to acquire the property.
So I'm going to start to share some of this. So then what happened? Now you own two houses. You knocked one down. You turned one into a rental. You got carrying costs because you've got dirt costs, right? So how do you go from buying a single family brick ranch house to building a pocket neighborhood?
Yeah, so I mean, I guess part of the story with what we're now calling Hudson Commons is that when I bought the property, it was zoned for 10 units an acre, which, if you got 2.5 acres, that's still, quite a few houses. But the town of Hudson works with a planner from Western Piedmont Council of Governments who helped them write a high density residential overlay district zoning ordinance for the downtown area of Hudson. And they approached me to see if I would be interested in rezoning the property to that new district, which took it from 10 units an acre to up to 25 units per acre if you did multifamily. So it just allows a lot more density, a lot more flexibility of use. And it was, you know, almost rubber stamped, through the planning board and public hearing with town council. So it's probably the easiest rezoning in history, but, gives us the ability to do something, much more innovative now with that.
Yeah. And that's when you brought me to the table, right? And said, hey, listen, we got the rezoning. I've got a couple other projects. I'm still trying to finish Duke Street. I sit on Pathway Communities as a board of trustees, and I don't know that this is the right Pathway community or the right place to test this model, but would you be interested? Right. And that's when I said, well, let's look at it. One of the key ingredients for me for a Pathway Communities prospective development is that there's an element of adaptive reuse, some form of adaptive reuse. There's plenty of greenfield development. There's plenty of cutting trees and emptying vacancies, creating, curb to gutter, floor to area ratio, maximizing profit, squeezing as many in as possible. I come from the office development industry and I love old buildings. So I always thought that it was a terrible waste to watch something that had value go into the landfill and then build something right on top of it. So you said to me, nope, it's got a house on it, right? And I just showed a picture of what that house looked like. Um, so part of my involvement then was you got it cleared and rezoned. You did some work to get it to a point where you could at least cash carry a renter in one property. And then you presented it back to me and said the house could act as an adaptive reuse, right?
Yeah, so it could literally be the commons at Hudson Commons. So a shared, community space, and you'll do a much better job, laying out the vision for what that space will, be used for.
Yeah, and I'll pull that up here in just a second, but I want to make sure that we touch on the rezoning part a little bit because it gets glazed over for people that don't understand the nuance. It's not easy to get a property rezoned for density because you have people who don't want that for whatever reason. So this was a bit of a unique opportunity in that the town and the stakeholders in the municipality were all very, very interested in creating walkability, right? So can you go into that just a little bit so we don't glaze over how difficult it normally is versus having a tailwind versus a headwind?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the easiest way to tell that story is I've been on the planning board in Granite Falls where I live for over 10 years, and I've seen many good projects come to the planning board, be recommended for approval to town council, but they have to go through a public hearing. And that's when all the signs get posted on the property. The neighbors all come out and complain or protest, in essence, that they don't want this in their backyard. And, 99% of the time, those, at least in my experience, those projects get denied or shot down because these are elected officials and they don't want to make all their constituents mad. In some cases, that might be their neighborhood, where they live, and they don't want it either. So, unfortunately, too many times it's not about what's best for the community. What does the community need? It's just what's best for me. And, that's unfortunate. But yeah, this is a very unique situation, especially in a small southern town like Hudson, North Carolina, for the town council to be adopting, a high density overlay district in the first place, but then, approaching a developer saying, "Hey, would you be interested in rezoning?" and essentially testing this out for us because they really wanted some projects to sort of pilot this new overlay district.
Yeah, well, I can't tell you how much I appreciate that it all came together. It was definitely out of sequence for us because we were still building our pathway community model and creating our funding structure and trying to put together, what it was gonna be. And then you sort of called me out of nowhere and said, dude, I think we might have to just do this. So let me share what this sort of first iteration looks like with these folks. And, I'll take them through kind of the discussion. This is Main Street, Central Avenue here. There's train tracks and probably some sort of future opportunity for economic development along this, whether it be a greenway or some sort of opportunity. Just on the other side of this area down here, which you can't see, is effectively downtown Hudson. So there's a place to walk. There's a little pub down there. There's a place to grab a bite to eat. So this is really literally just one block back from town. And what we've got here is a pocket neighborhood. This is roughly 40 some odd units of missing middle product. Right now, Hudson basically has a a homogeneous inventory of housing, meaning most of their homes look very similar. They're single family homes, Euclidean zoning, traditional house on acreage. This sort of provides a new type of product where we have standalone small bungalow style houses, 450 square feet, bigger than a tiny home, but smaller than a single family home. And then two-story traditional standalone homes that you can see up here. And then, of course, in the back here, this yellow portion shows some sort of multifamily type condominiumized product. So it gives us an opportunity to create product that doesn't exist currently in the marketplace, and then also adds the flavor of home ownership so that this isn't a rental model, but these folks will actually be participating in the upside of equity. Here's the existing house, which is the commons. That's the picture that I showed you before. And this is just kind of a couple of sample elevations that we worked on with the rocket shop up in Durham, North Carolina. Rob, talk just a little bit about Aaron and Jennifer up there. I think they've been great partners so far, and I think they're an asset to the region. So I think they need a shout out real quick.
Yeah, for sure. So you guys might be familiar with the name Aaron Lubeck. He's been in the planning world for a long time. Yeah, he and Jennifer Truman, his business partner, are the Rocket Shop in Durham, and I think they call themselves the Planning Whisperers or something like that, zoning whisperers. But they are really skilled at taking a piece of property and helping you think through the different possibilities for what will the zoning allow, and coming up with different configurations for how to maximize the opportunity. But as Chris said, not just for profit motivation, but for what's the most livable community, how does it fit into the broader context around it, because a lot of what they do is urban infill, and that's certainly what we're promoting here as well.
Yeah, so this is a image here of the existing home. with a conceptual overlay of the programming that goes into the commons. A lot of times, market rate developers will market things like swimming pools and pickleball courts and movie theaters and that kind of thinking. This is our marketing for this product is going to be resilience. So we want to create a commons area for folks. So we're putting in a community kitchen. We're reimagining this home, grandma's ranch house with co-working space, third space, so that the folks who live in a small bungalow style home, maybe, a single nurse, call it, needs to get out of the house a little bit and do something. They can come in and work, or they can come in and contribute to the community kitchen or kick around a fire pit. That's the idea. And we're also going to try to repurpose the bedrooms that are in the existing home for short-term overnight rentals for the community, so that if a friend comes from town or mom and dad want to come visit, they can stay without having to cramp into a small 450 square foot single bedroom studio. So those gathering spaces are extremely important. They also act during a time of need, again, post Helene, as a hub, a resiliency hub. If we have a community kitchen that's been thought through and designed to serve the community in a time of need, this is, remember, a community full of civil servants to begin with. We'll have a lot of folks here that are already dedicated to contributing to their community. And now we're going to have, backup generation or some independence, energy independence associated with creating a microgrid, and some PV. So you can see that we've kind of reimagined this space into what the supportive services will be. And also, we've started to reimagine this. Rob, you haven't seen this stuff yet. This is outside of Hudson, North Carolina, but maybe when you move into a higher end version of this, if you had you know, a ski resort or some community development around essential workers in an area where they wanted to build something a little bit nicer, or in, again, Western North Carolina, getting into our sort of timber frame mode here, you can see this house reimagined now, putting a front porch on it and really sort of inviting people to use it. So these are the three sort of conceptual renderings of what that could potentially look like and how the community would potentially use the commons building. So you haven't seen those yet, and there's a lot more to come.
No, but now I like that house a lot better.
Yeah, it's a lot cooler now, isn't it? Everybody that can't see it wants to knock it down, and I'm always there's a lot of tree huggers in the world. I'm a building hugger. I live in a 1910 bungalow. You've been to my farmhouse built in the 1870s. People think stuff's gonna fall down a lot quicker than it does. If you keep it dry or you let it get wet and then let it dry out, you're fine, right? So I just think that it's so hard to build a structure from scratch, let alone the energy it takes to tear something down and then rebuild it. That's kind of our concept here. So, well, you said that we would lose people in 30 minutes, and we're at 30 minutes. So, anything else that you want to tell a land development class in Virginia Tech that we didn't hit here? I don't know. And maybe you let me know if there's something here.
Sorry, I had somebody walk in there.
No, that's all right. I was just trying to wrap it up. I said, we're at 30 minutes, and you mentioned to me as a seasoned lecturer of students in the college days that we would lose them after a half an hour. So anything left that we missed or that we should point out or talk about before we send off these brilliant minds to have an after discussion?
No, I mean, I hate we're not live, to be able to do a Q&A with them, but, maybe there's an opportunity to do that at another time. But yeah, would love to get feedback, from the students on what they think about what we're trying to do. And, is this somewhere they would want to live, one day?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of the Pathway Communities model, is the front end and the back end of our opportunity to have a career. So we're trying to design these pocket neighborhoods for 20 somethings to early 30s, and then also convert that model into age in place, so that as we're exiting our career path in our, well, mid 50s, Rob, and, into our early 60s, would we like to think that we could consolidate and downsize and live a more simple lifestyle on the age in place side? So it does speak to two sides of the equation, bookends of the equation. Any dirt on Professor Leonard while we don't have him here to protect himself?
I know better than go there.
Yeah, smart. Me too. Well, guys, thank you for giving us a half an hour of your time. It was fun to share with you what we're working on. I would urge you to work together to understand that putting together a project, putting together a development is truly an integrated project delivery approach. You've got to understand your financing, and you've got to build to a specific demographic. What are we trying to do, and who are we trying to build to is really, really important. Instead of the old mantra of build it and they will come. Build it and they will come gets dangerous, doesn't it, Mr. Howard?
It certainly can.
Well, thank you, Virginia Tech. We appreciate you. Reach out with questions.